Hey there, if you missed class today, I went over the answers to the 10.2 assignment that I assigned last Friday. So I'm going to go through those with you now. We do have a quiz on this and section 1 tomorrow. It's 6 points, so I'll do a quick review of that. Make sure that you do go to the Schoology page, though, and read all of the instructions for what we did in class today, because it also includes instructions about the midterm exam, which we're going to be taking next week. So please read that over and open the midterm folder and check out the resources in there. All right, so Andrew Jackson was elected in 1828, as you know, and there's a lot going on during his presidency, really. The stage is being set for a civil war. They don't know it at the time, but of course, we know it now looking back. Number 1, next to each region, write or type what their economies depended upon. There was a map in the book that showed the different regions. They were color-coded, and then the paragraphs below the map explained how each region developed differently. The North, and we have mentioned this before, depended on trade and manufacturing. It's been that way really since day one because the soil and climate in the North are not great for farming, so they had to rely on other things to make a living. Whereas in the South, the climate and the soil are great for farming, so they really did put all their eggs in that basket. They've been depending on agriculture since the 1600s. They've been depending on slavery since the 1600s. And when industrialization was taking off in the North, the South basically decided not to jump on that bandwagon, and they really have just remained focused on agriculture and slavery. So 2 very different economies and ways of life in those different regions. But then you have the West, which is almost like a combination of the two. In the West, there is a lot of farming, not as much slave labor as there is in the South, but they also are relying upon the sale of land. It's a new open area that is filling up with settlers that are heading out in that direction. So their economies are kind of centered around that settlement of new frontiersmen and farming. So that's how our 3 regions are developing differently, and that is highlighted, which means it'll be on tomorrow's quiz. Number 2, what were the arguments for and against protective tariffs? We talked about protective tariffs when we compared Alexander Hamilton to Thomas Jefferson, and we learned at that point that Hamilton wanted tariffs. He was a northern city guy who supported manufacturing, whereas Thomas Jefferson did not want tariffs. He was a southern plantation owner, and he felt like they hurt people. So it really is along the same lines. This is sort of review for us. So if you're for tariffs, which are import taxes, by the way, if you forget what those are, I'll write that down. The idea is that you make foreign goods more expensive than American-made goods because it supposedly will encourage people to buy American-made products. But the people who are against them argue that they make goods too expensive to import, and the American companies might raise their prices anyway. So that's why people are against it. And it tends to be people in the North that are for the tariffs. People in the South tend to be against them. How might the sectional disputes over the tariff of abominations lead to future problems between the North and South? Well, the tariff of abominations, remember, is a tariff that was passed late in the presidency of John Quincy Adams. So Jackson basically inherited that problem. Tariff of abominations was a nickname given to the tariff by the people in the South because they hated it so much, because an abomination is a hateful thing. It was a tariff on wool products that were coming from England, basically, because that's where we were getting these things. And it made those things extremely expensive, almost too expensive to even purchase. And it was causing some economic problems down in the South. The North wanted them, though, because it eliminated foreign competition from those textile mills over in Britain. So obviously there is definitely a disagreement regionally. The North wants the tariff, the South doesn't, and you can kind of see the writing on the wall. This foreshadows the deep divisions that are going to lead to the Civil War. They didn't know it, but we of course know it looking back. You can already see that schism forming, that deep division. All right, so the stage is being set for that. Meanwhile, the southern states start to really cry foul. And they're so against this tariff that they decide they're going to nullify it. Nullify means you get rid of something, right? Notice that I've added a definition for nullification here. This will be on your quiz. That's why it's highlighted. So you will want to add that. It might already be on your page. I honestly can't remember if it's on the student copy or not. If it's not there, please add it. Nullification means that states can ignore federal laws that they don't like. So basically, the southern states were saying, you know what? This tariff is so terrible, and it obviously only benefits one region of the country. They felt like it was unconstitutional for that reason, and they felt like they shouldn't have to even follow it. They actually went so far as to pass something called the Nullification Act, which said that they absolutely were not going to follow laws that were passed by the federal government that they didn't like. This was led by South Carolina. And remember, John C. Calhoun is from South Carolina. Now, John C. Calhoun was Andrew Jackson's vice president. So this obviously causes a major rift. Jackson didn't really like the tariff either, because remember, he's also a plantation owner from Tennessee. However, he's the president, and he did not want any of the states to get away with not following federal law. He definitely wanted to have power over them. So he was kind of stuck here between a rock and a hard place. So he stands his ground, and John C. Calhoun is actually going to resign over all of this. He supports nullification and states' rights, and he decides to quit his job because of it. He quits as vice president, and then Martin Van Buren, who was Secretary of State at the time, is going to become the new vice president. John C. Calhoun is then going to join the Senate, actually, so that he can still be involved in the government. So he's going to leave those vice presidency and then become a senator for South Carolina. And he supports it. He supports nullification. He says, yes, the South should be able to not enforce federal laws that they don't like, whereas Daniel Webster, who's from Massachusetts, a northern state, opposes nullification and supports national unity over states' rights. So there it is. I'm showing you right here this division that is happening. These divisions between North and South, they're going to lead to the Civil War. There it is right there. You can see it playing out right before your eyes. It's too bad they didn't predict it at the time. The southern states like South Carolina were basically threatening to leave the country if their wishes were not respected. So it really it becomes a crisis. They call it the nullification crisis because states almost left the Union. Now, Henry Clay comes along, and I can't remember if he was a representative or a senator at this time. He bounced back and forth, but he was definitely in the government, and he offered up a compromise. His compromise was, why don't you, South Carolina, keep enforcing the tariff, but how about the government agrees to lessen the amount over time? Decreasing the amount of tax that you have to pay. And then everybody ultimately agreed to that. So it was a successful compromise. Please know, although I can't remember if this is on your notes or not, but this part here, make sure you add this if it's not there. South Carolina did lead the nullification movement. You should know that. So why do you think South Carolina ended up accepting Clay's compromise? This is kind of like an opinion. It wouldn't be on a quiz or anything, but I put South Carolina got some of what they wanted by agreeing to a plan that gradually lowered the tax. Leaving the Union over the issue of tariffs might have hurt the state more than it would have helped it. So they probably realized, like, okay, what we are threatening is very serious, and we're not even sure we can pull it off. So I guess if they're going to lower it over time, that's a win. That's probably what they were thinking. So Henry Clay comes through again. Mr. Compromise. So notice the highlighted material. South Carolina led the nullification movement. Nullification means that states can ignore federal laws that they don't like. And the 3 regions and their economies. Those are the things that you need to know for tomorrow's quiz from section 2. Going back to section 1, just to remind you, you need to know the definition of nominating conventions, the definition of spoils system, and who supported Andrew Jackson. Those are your 6 questions on the quiz tomorrow. Again, make sure you go to the Schoology page and follow the instructions. Open the midterm folder, check out those resources because your midterm is next week and that'll be here before you know it.